When you think of when America had first started out, you think about the exploration and the encounter with the Indians and the exchange. So to start out with, I'd like to talk about Lewis and Clark and their expedition. So President Jefferson requested that Congress approve a $2,500 amount for an exploratory expedition west. Once Congress approved the funds for the expedition, the president chose Meriwether Lewis as the leader. Lewis was chosen mainly because he already had some knowledge of the West and was an experienced Army officer. After making further arrangements for the expedition, Lewis decided he wanted a co-captain. So he chose William Clark.
Congress has authorized us to have an exploration west. I name Meriwether Lewis as the lead explorer.
As my co-captain, I choose William Clark.
Hey-yo! So the goals of this expedition, as outlined by President Jefferson, were to study the Native American tribes living in the area, as well as the plants, animals, geology, and terrain of the region. The expedition was also to be a diplomatic one and aid in transferring power over the lands and the people living on them from the French and Spanish to the United States. President Jefferson wanted the expedition to find a direct waterway to the west coast and the Pacific Ocean to aid in future expansion.
We're off on a journey to the west to see the wonderful plants and animals.
So Lewis and Clark's expedition officially began on May 21st, 1804. The Corps of Discovery, as they were also known, reached the edge of the Great Plains and saw the area's many different species, most of which were new to them. They also met their first Sioux tribe, the Yankton Sioux, in a peaceful encounter. Their next meeting with the Sioux was not as peaceful. In September 1804, the Corps met the Teton Sioux further west. The chief demanded that the Corps give them a boat before being allowed to pass. The Corps refused. The Tetons threatened violence, and the Corps prepared to fight. Before serious hostilities began, though, both sides retreated.
We reached the end of the plain.
Shnikes! What's that? Is that an Indian tribe?
The Yankton Sioux.
You come in peace?
Yes.
Then we welcome you. Stop. We demand a boat from you before you may pass.
We refuse.
Then you are no longer welcome here.
Oh, back up. Retreat.
Calm down. Calm down.
The Corps then at last reached the Pacific Ocean in December 1805 and built Fort Clatsop on the south side of the Columbia River to wait out the winter. During their time at the fort, the men explored the area, hunted elk and other wildlife, met Native American tribes, and prepared for their journey home.
We have reached the ocean! Halfway through our journey. Oh, look, it's some deer.
Their expedition brought a wealth of knowledge about the newly purchased lands in the West and provided extensive facts on the Northwest natural resources. Lewis and Clark were able to document over 100 animal species and over 170 plants. They also brought back information on the size, minerals, and the geology of the area. The expedition established relations with the Native Americans in the region. Aside from the confrontation with the Teton Sioux, these relations were largely peaceful, and the Corps received extensive help from the various tribes they met regarding things like food and navigation. Sacagawea, also spelled Sakakawea or Sacajawea. She was a guide for the Lewis and Clark expedition. She knew what was edible along the route and often helped by gathering greens, berries, and the like to eat. Sacagawea was used and valued as an interpreter. The most important service that Sacagawea rendered came with her presence. A woman with a child announced to the Indians that the Corps of Discovery did not constitute a war party. She had helped save the expedition several times thanks to her negotiation skills and knowledge in medical herbs and knowledge of the terrain.
Clark, come. Dig, root.
They have a child. They come in peace. You are welcome here. The Europeans traded with a variety of tribes. Natural riches of the land were important to the native people. When the Europeans came and offered to trade valuable goods with the Indians for their beaver furs and other animal furs, the native tribes fought with each other to gain control of the land and of the trade. Fur trade always depended on close cooperation between the Native Americans and Europeans.
You. Give gun. Give gun. You take drum. I take gun. Big.
Native Americans valued the iron tools, blankets, cloth, and colorful beads brought by the Europeans. The Europeans valued the beaver pelt and other animal skins used to make fashionable clothing for those back in England, France, Germany, and elsewhere. Trade between Native Americans and the white settlers enabled the newcomers to develop ways to survive and to profit from the rich resources of North America. The goods involved in this trade were those desired or needed by the Indians too, so they benefited. Items such as lead, powder, knives, axes, fire stills, and blankets were items of survival. Other items such as awls, needles, beads, and fabric had a very high demand, and they also traded brass kettles, spoons, soup plates, and iron ladle.
Iron ladle! Clothes.
The first European explorers and colonists gave Native Americans glass and ceramic beads as gifts, and also used the beads for trade. These goods were most frequently transported along rivers and streams by canoe, or along roads and trails by wagon or pack animals to the sites of convenience to the Indians. Trading posts became a fixture in frontier existence, and all too often alcoholic beverages were among the items traded. Native Americans were introduced to alcohol by whites, which had a negative effect on the natives. As the native population grew smaller through illness and conflict with the European settlers forced them off their homelands, the fur trading system began to collapse. The number of beaver and other animals sought for their furs declined. And finally, the fashion in Europe switched to silk hats. So another important aspect of American history was the encounter with the Indians. So I will be pronouncing a couple words here that I'm not for sure if I'm saying correct, so bear with me. The Pilgrims had barely survived their first winter and were unsure of how they would make it through the spring of 1621. When the Pilgrims barely survived their first winter in the New World, the head sachem of the Wampanoags, Massasoit, sent Samoset to investigate the Europeans' intentions. After some time, Samoset returned to Massasoit with a report. Soon, Massasoit sent Tisquantum, better known as Squanto, to assist the Pilgrims.
Hey! Investigate the whites. Intentions. Now. Oh, my!
We barely survived this winter.
Hello! I'm named Squanto. I here help you scavenge for food and hunt.
Nice to meet you.
Squanto lived with the Pilgrims and taught them how to grow and catch food. He also taught the Pilgrims how to find edible native foods such as berries and nuts. Squanto taught the Pilgrims how to hunt deer, bears, and turkeys, and how to catch fish using nets. Throughout history, the Indians have continually been pushed out of their lands, and we have also tried to teach the Indians religion. And there have been some very unpleasant encounters with the Indians, especially in regard to religion. We've tried to assimilate the Indians into the white culture, and that was also met with resistance and a lot of heartache and despair in the end. The exploration, encounter, and exchange with the Indians played a very important part in American history. I hope you've learned a lot and enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.